Hey, this is Pastor Curry, pastor of the East Zion Fair Baptist Church, Wilmington's most exciting church, the church that love ya and anything you can do about it. Today with Coffee with Curry, we got something new, we got something fresh, but yet a person who has returned, who's very much concerned about the environmental issues that are going on in not only the state of Delaware, but across the country. And with all the things that are happening with Donald Trump and his administration and Elon Musk doing all the cutting, we who are in Delaware are really in for some serious, troublesome and turbulent days. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion with Mr. Willie Scott, who is from the Sierra Club. And it's going to be a very, very good conversation. We get an opportunity to hear what they're doing now. Why don't you call somebody real quickly? Tell them Coffee with Curry is on, and let's get after it.
Good morning, Delaware and surrounding areas. You are now tuned in to this week's Coffee with Curry. Join us every Sunday at 11 a.m. with new guests every week. So grab your cup of coffee and join us on Coffee with Curry.
And we're back. Well, Mr. Willie Scott, it has been a joy the last time we talked with you, and it's been a little while now since we had a conversation, and we were very concerned about all the things that were going on in the environmental world. You were serving at the time as the vice chair of the executive committee for the Sierra Club, and I know those things are time they're by time limited, term limited. But before I get started today, catch us up on how are you doing? How are things happening in your life?
Fast and furious, I guess is the easy way to describe it, and confusing.
Okay.
But I think, when you look at the broad picture of where we are today from an environmental standpoint, there's the federal administration and in terms of what it's trying to do, the Trump administration. And from an environmental standpoint, they're taking every step they possibly can to eliminate the key elements of the Environmental Protection Agency. And if people aren't familiar with the EPA or the Environmental Protection Agency, that's the body that's put together to ensure that, people's health, is protected, and that we have the proper controls around, emissions and what chemicals can be emitted and how much. There was a lot of push during the Biden administration to ensure that there was a strong environmental justice component within the EPA. That's been dismantled. All the offices have basically been closed for the Environmental Justice Office. Most of the regulations or tools that are used to help environmental justice communities understand their exposure to health risk and those kind of things, all of those have been taken away. So anything that feels like DEI, that term now that we hear, has basically been destroyed or eliminated from the EPA. So at the federal level, it sets up a real challenge for us in terms of how to deal with that and, how to not only advance, but now, having to recoup some of the advances that had already been made. So from that perspective, it's challenging, and it's a difficult period for us right now. But there's good news and bad news, so we'll talk a little bit about that perhaps.
Yeah. And while you were speaking, I was thinking, I don't want to put you on the spot as being the person who knows all the answers, but, why do you think, because I noticed under Republican leadership, there's a whole lot of deregulation. Under Democratic leadership, there's a lot of regulation, and people tend to get a little frustrated because they say regulation is more red tape. But in actuality, when you're dealing with people's health, that is serious, and especially the environment. Why do you think that there's always such a big, major difference in leaderships as it relates to Republicans and Democrats?
That's a great question. So regulation, I put it into the context of what we've seen happen with other terms like critical race theory, CRT, all of a sudden became a boogeyman, a bad thing. DEI now is the current boogeyman, it's a bad thing. But we all recognize that both CRT and DEI are beneficial for the advancement of society.
Right.
They're all positive things. But those things then become used as fear tactics and levers to acquire votes is what it comes down to.
Wow.
And so when you think about regulations, what I always say is that think about regulations as protections. They're not just, red tape.
Absolutely.
They're designed to protect humans and protect people, from risk. And so we all benefit from regulations. They're beneficial things. They're good things. They're not necessarily good things as viewed from the business community. because in a lot of cases, those regulations require them to either take more time to do what they want to do or spend more money to do what they want to do. So the push has always been from the business side to reduce regulations, okay, and reduce those barriers to, advancing their profits and businesses. So that again, is another one of those terms that's been, I won't say obfuscated or confusing for people, but it's been co-opted, to imply something negative, okay? And regulations are negative. Regulations are protections. And so when we look at the environmental side and we think about environmental regulations, all of those regulations are there to say, okay, we're going to improve the quality of water. Here's how we're going to do it. Okay, we're going to improve the quality of air. Here's how we're going to do it. Those are regulations. Those are protections. So again, it's one of those strategies, I think, from the business side to imply that regulations are negative when in fact they're positive and beneficial for most Americans. Okay, but they do create constraints and I'll just call it constraints for the business community because there are things that they have to do, things they have to comply with, things they have to maybe spend money on to comply with. And so therefore they cast it as negative. And so the push is from the business side to get rid of as many regulations as possible so that, they have a greater opportunity to improve their profits.
Yeah, I don't think people really understand the level of risk that they find themselves in without regulations.
Exactly.
I appreciate the way you have shared. It's not really, we shouldn't look at them as regulations, but we should look at them as safeguards.
Right.
Because just being residents of Delaware, there's a high level of cancer. There's other things that generations have died from that we never even knew we were exposed to. And as we are getting exposed, sure, the business community is saying, hey, we don't have time to worry about that. Most of them are not in those communities where they're at high risk.
None of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're right. The real answer is none of them are in those communities. But, sometimes when we are giving these interviews, we're trying to be as kind as possible. But the reality of it is they're not exposed to the levels that we are.
No.
And to deregulate so much or to remove the safeguards is horrible. When Elon Musk came in on the national level and you mentioned it earlier, just slashed and closed down all of these safeguard offices, if I can just change the language with you, how does that affect Delaware?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of our environmental regulations in the state are built from federal regulations.
Right.
And so one risk that we run is that as those federal regulations are rolled back, okay, then it opens up the opportunity for state businesses to say, hey, you guys are not in compliance with the feds.
Right.
Okay. Now, interestingly, though, if you look at states like California, and then you go back 30 or 40 years, you remember when you couldn't see the skyline in California?
Right.
California stepped up beyond what was called for by the feds and said, okay, here's how we're going to clean up our air in this state. And so their regulations in California are much stricter in a lot of cases, particularly as it relates to air pollution, than the federal regulations require. So that creates kind of a legal basis for the state to be able to say, these federal guidelines are minimum standards. And therefore, if we want to protect the citizens of Delaware, we can go beyond those minimum standards to put in place the regulations or protections that we think are important for the state. So the opportunity is there for the state to really step up, and I think that's where the focus needs to be going forward. We see what's happening with the current administration. I hate to call the guy's name, but the current administration. Okay. And there are organizations out there, including the Sierra Club, that are fighting tooth and nail on, everything that we see that we feel is inappropriate for this time. State attorneys general, across the country are banding together to fight back on some of the 2025, Project 2025 stuff. So there are lots of organizations fighting at the federal level, and people need to be, aware of what's going on there. But our real opportunity to protect ourselves lies within the state of Delaware.
Right.
And so fortunately, I'll say fortunately, we have, new state leadership. We have a new governor. We have a new leadership group at DNREC now, the organization within the state or the agency within the state that's responsible for protecting the environment, our state EPA, so to speak. And I think both of those groups are more sympathetic to the needs of the state in terms of environmental protection, and particularly the needs of environmental justice communities. So from a state standpoint, we're actually in a better position than we were last year.
Oh, wow.
Okay, in
Interesting.
terms of leadership
Okay.
commitment, I think. So it creates opportunities for us to say, okay, we'll let these other organizations like the Sierra Club, deal with what's happening at the federal level. Be aware of those things, be tuned into them so you understand what's going on. But the effort needs to be focused on the state legislators, the senators and representatives at the state level, and the governor,
Right.
and NREC to
Yeah.
say, here's what we need to do. Then and ensure that they're focused on our needs and fill that void that's being created by the feds.
Do you feel, and I'm glad you brought it to that level where you talked about California first
Mhm.
and how they really put in above standards,
Right.
and how they now you can see their skyline. You can see it's not a cloudy day every day.
Right.
Do you see or feel now that our leadership is heading in the right direction to say, okay, the federal government is going to do what it does.
Mhm.
The lawyer is going to sue who they need to sue.
Right.
But in the meantime, because cancer is so high here in Delaware, do you feel as a professional who serves in the Sierra Club that our state is doing that? Is saying we're going to up our standards. We're going to strengthen what we have.
I believe so. And I
Okay.
say I believe so because
Okay.
it's still early in the game for
Absolutely.
us, right?
Absolutely.
We just got the new administration in
And,
here.
and what about now with the old administration? It was just move along as we go along, or did you feel there was some aggression to make it better with the old leadership?
No, I did not feel that aggression at the old
Okay.
leadership. It was very business friendly.
Okay, very okay.
And so, there was always capitulation to the business side.
Okay.
And, again, that's I think we talked about this last time. That's a tough argument, right?
Okay.
Because we want more jobs in the state, right?
Mhm.
We want better paying jobs in the state. That's good for everybody, right?
Mhm.
And so the intent here is not to squelch job growth, but to push job growth in a direction of where there are good jobs for everybody, okay? But they don't kill people,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And I use that term grossly, because that's what it manifests itself in.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we kind of skirt around that, saying protecting people's health and all that kind of stuff. No, when people are put in a position where they have to breathe poison 24/7,
Yeah.
okay, you're killing people.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so there's a way to have good paying jobs that don't put us in that predicament. Employers can take or companies can take measures to ensure that if you're going to locate in one of these communities, that's the first question, right? And should you, since we already have a disproportionate level of pollution in some of our EJ communities, should we add to that? Right. So that's one question. And the second part of that question is, okay, if you do, what are you going to do to minimize your impact from a health risk standpoint?
Right.
So I think our new administration, understands that. We've got people at DENREC now, Dana Cobb, who's been around
Yes.
for a while.
Mhm.
She's a deputy secretary. She understands, I think, the issues that, EJ communities face. Greg Patterson, again, he's been around the state for a while in various state agencies. And again, I think he's more receptive. In the past, we've gotten pushback,
Absolutely.
from
Okay.
DENREC on some of the things we felt needed to be changed. I think going forward, we'll see, I won't say pull, okay, but at least a sympathetic approach to, what we feel needs to be done and perhaps some support.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that your comments are very true, and that under this current administration, as the governor's side, the governor level, he is pro business too.
Yeah.
But you how you say you can be pro business and still take care of our environment.
exactly.
So to hear you say that you believe it's still early in the game, but you believe that there is a strong push given the leadership that we have in DENREC, and I've happened to work with DENREC
Mhm.
on various projects, including the project here at East Zion Fair, and that have a governor who definitely wants business. He's made some moves to prove that he wants business here,
Exactly.
but yet not neglecting the environment is very, very important. For those of you who are watching, we're talking with Mr. Willie Scott, who is a part of the Sierra Club, and one of the things that caught my attention was the fact that we don't have enough voices in the city and the state, across the country, to really speak to the critical need to have more focus put on environmental issues. Cancer in Delaware is very, very high. And it's not high because, one day somebody woke up with cancer and gave the whole state cancer. But it's really because of all the pollutants that are in our soil, in our water, in our air. And I've really spent some time trying to talk with people of his status to just get a feel for it. And it's great to hear that the current administration is at least moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
We know what we got to deal with on the national level. It is horrendous. It is really, literally, it is. And we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the Sierra Club is trying to do and what we could probably do and how you can get involved. We'll be right back. And we're back. We've had an opportunity here to talk with Mr. Willie Scott about various environmental issues, and I was very happy to hear even how California has proven that we can go beyond just paying attention to what the national is doing, but we can really start paying attention to what we're doing locally. And when I mean locally, I mean by the states. And Mr. Scott, you feel that we're moving in the right direction, given all the trauma and traumatic things that are happening at the national level, but you feel that there's good people at DNREC to help push the agenda to pay attention to people's health.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that at this time?
Yeah, I think that's true. And, again, the proof is in the pudding, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
That needs to be tested.
We're going to bring you back.
Okay.
We're going to bring you back. We're not going to stop this because our health matter.
Right.
And all too often, we don't pay attention until we're sick. But it's what is causing a lot of this sickness is what we need you all around there who are fighting and saying, look, we need this, we need that, and we need the other. What are some of the concerns that you find in the health and the environmental aspect that are happening here in Delaware?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the state, and you can almost split it into two pieces. There's a downstate component, when you get Kent County and beyond, particularly down in Sussex County, and then there's Newcastle. The predominant issues we have in Newcastle relate to air quality. We've got a lot of highways running through here, but we also have a legacy of chemical manufacturing plants in this area, and heavy industries in this area. And so that typically, it manifests itself as a lot of pollution going into the atmosphere. And then that's compounded by the fact that these industries are located in the same places that people live. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we've got a section of Newcastle County that's cordoned off and fenced off, and we put all the industries over there, and then people live over on this side. They're intermingled with communities, and that's what creates these what we call EJ communities in Newcastle County, where we've got the disproportionate levels of emissions in certain communities versus what we have in others. And so, to be blunt again, there are no industries in Greenville. Mm-hmm. Okay. But when we get down in Southbridge and we get down around Route 9, that's where you see the concentration of heavy industries and smokestacks and chemicals being emitted into the atmosphere. And these are in places where people live and breathe. So you mentioned cancer rates earlier. That's a factor in those communities. The other factor in those communities are respiratory issues. Mm-hmm. And so you can see a close correlation between where these industries are located and asthma rates, particularly for children. In terms of emergency visits, or visits to the emergency room for asthma attacks, that gets charted by the Department of Health. And so you can actually look at the data and see that in these zip codes, the rate of, emergency room visits for asthma attacks is greater, than it is in other places. So the respiratory issues are another factor that, people need to be conscious of. And, those can have long-term effects that get beyond just asthma, right? I mean, we're talking about lung cancer and all those other things. When you go further downstate, the bigger issues relate to the poultry industry. And, the way that shows up is all of the I'm trying to think of a kind way to say this, but all of the leftovers from the poultry industry, whether that be chicken waste, that the chickens excrete, or the chicken parts that aren't used, to sell in the grocery store. Those all get chopped up, blended, And in a lot of cases, they get spread on the farmlands. And so then you've got this stuff on the farmland, and it's got a high level of what are called nitrates, leaches into the soil, and it eventually winds up in the water table, and it winds up in people's wells. So then we've got a water quality issue in the southern part of the state, primarily from those sources. But we also have, water contamination in the state from what are called POFAs. And think of Teflon, as a thing that people can relate to. But those chemicals are in a variety of home goods, things that we have in our homes that we might not think about, whether it be carpets, a frying pan or a baking pan or whatever. They're in so many different things we can't even think of it. And the issue with POFAs is, not only does it contaminate the water table, so it's in our drinking water, but it can also, once it gets into your body, it never leaves. And so they're called forever chemicals. Your body has no way to break those chemicals down and remove them. So they stay in you, and as they build up, they can create issues again with cancer. So water issues primarily in the southern part of the state around water quality, and in the northern part of the state, it's primarily around air quality.
I was sitting here thinking, are there any direct projects that the Sierra Club is working on and fighting for right now, like some direct issues or concerns?
Yeah, in fact, so again, at the local level, the national level, there, is a broad menu of stuff that the National Sierra Club is working on. At the local level, we've been focused the last couple of years at least on air quality. And so I think the last time we got together, we talked about the People's Anti-Pollution Bill. And that's focused primarily on the permitting process that DNREC uses. And the intent there is to reduce the amount of, air pollution that comes into communities across the state. And it also addresses some of the issues we've got downstate as well with water.
Have that gone before the Senate?
Yeah, so no, that's a great question. So last year we got the bill introduced late, and it didn't make it through the full process. During the off-season, or session, I should say, there was I won't call it a companion bill, but another bill that was focused on outreach and communications, around the permitting process. So that particular bill was, looking at how would DNREC and any industry that wanted to come into a community would engage the community. How do you let people know that this is happening? How do you, ensure that they have access to the hearings and the public meetings? And we were pushing back on that because we also had some of that content in the People's Anti-Pollution Bill, and some of those things were different. And so what we reconciled was, let's combine these two bills. And so now the new version of the People's Anti-Pollution Bill has some of the best elements of that outreach bill incorporated in it. And so that's going through a review process now, and hopefully we'll get it introduced, before this session ends this year.
Do you all have lobbyers down at the down in Dover?
We don't have lobbyists. The Sierra Club doesn't use lobbyists, but we do have employees and members that are constantly at Lake Hall, working with our, representatives and senators at the state level, and the various agencies, that need to be involved to make sure that they understand, what's being proposed and to help persuade them to support, whatever legislation we're bringing forward. So we don't use lobbyists per se, but we have 2 paid employees at the local club, and they spend a lot of time down at Leg Hall, working the process down there.
What do you consider to be their greatest frustrations, if they've shared that with you?
Yeah, so from an EJ standpoint, is the pace of change. So when we think about environmental issues, there's a whole range of environmental issues that have to do with, parkland, open land, opportunities to experience nature, conservation of those properties. We've got climate issues that we have to deal with. You saw a lot of action last year, and the Sierra Club was heavily involved in the last couple of years in the state climate action plan, move towards electrification and away from fossil fuels as being the source of electricity. Electric cars, EVs, the whole thing. And those are all big issues, and they affect everybody because climate change affects everybody. Um, and so, we've seen progress made in those areas. Uh, haven't seen as much progress made in some of the EJ areas. And I think one of my bigger frustrations is, how do we get the priority and the status of the EJ issues that we've got in the state at the same level, to the same level as we see some of the bigger issues. I won't say bigger issues, but some of the broader issues. So that's been a bit frustrating. It's taken time. This People's Anti-Pollution Bill, we've been working on that now for 4 years. And 4 years may not sound like a long time, but again, I always put it in the context of that's 4 more years that people have had to breathe this stuff, without any mitigation. And so I wrote a piece a little while ago for our newsletter, and the title of it was EJ, Where There's a Will, There's a Way. Then part of that was to share my frustration, with, progress on some of these issues. But the contrast was, a few years ago, Insight, I don't know if you're familiar with Insight, but they're a pharmaceutical company. They used to be part of DuPont. DuPont spun it off, and another company bought it, and they've been growing since then. And they make some great specialty drugs. They bought the old Wanamaker's property over in Alapocas a few years ago, and located their headquarters in a small research facility there. They had a plan to expand so that they could bring in their staff from Pennsylvania. They had about 100 people, I think, working still in Pennsylvania, so they wanted to consolidate everything there in the Alapocas area. The residents in Alapocas didn't want that. And these were all $100,000 plus jobs. I mean, really, professional jobs, up to $250,000 level. So the whole thing around bringing jobs into Delaware, right? We got that on the table now, high-paying jobs. But the residents, and this is an affluent white community, around Alapocas, felt like, number one, there'd be too much car traffic, from the new 100 people coming in, when they come to work and leave in the afternoon. And that the light from the parking garage would be a problem for them at night. And so they pushed back and then were successful in shutting that project down, okay? And, when I think about light pollution, if I talk to people in the EJ communities, they would probably laugh at that being a problem, right? When you breathe in, stuff from these smokestacks. So they shut the project down. However, the state and the city stepped up to say, let's work on this some more, right? And the current plan is to and I won't say current plan because it's already in action. Insight now is buying the old MBNA buildings downtown. They're going to relocate, that component of their headquarters to downtown and the campus. And the state came up with $14 million to facilitate that, to help that happen. And so when you look at the contrast of, how quickly and effectively, the state and the city were able to deal with that issue, protecting jobs, protecting, people's concerns around their exposure to whatever, light, I guess, versus how quickly we respond to issues in our EJ communities, there's a huge contrast. Okay, and the contrast is obvious, right? And the rationale behind the contrast is obvious. Rich white people versus not so rich poor people, poor people of color. And so that's the frustration for me is, we can do some of these things that we know we need to do. It's just that we don't have the will to. And that's what we've got to work on is creating that will with our state representatives and our state senators. And hopefully, we can get some support on that from the governor to recognize that we need to even out the playing field here on how we approach some of these things. Because if we want to mitigate some of these risks, we can, and we know how to. And we've demonstrated that. So let's apply what we know.
Yeah, a lot of times we are our biggest enemies.
Yeah.
People want change, but they don't want change. They want better, but they don't want better. It's like sometimes I sit back and I say some of these public hearings, while we need them for information purposes, we need to know what's going on in our community. But sometimes you can get people who can be bought to ensure that things don't progress for their better. And because they're the empty wagon with the most noise, it tend to scare some people.
Right. Right.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And when you were talking, I just sat back and I was thinking, I said, it's just not fair. Sometimes people come to the meetings and they just cry loud and then they think that's going to help. But in actuality, it's harming sometimes more than ever. But we do need the public meetings, but it's just sometimes it's just out of control.
Yeah. And I think that's where, organizations like the Sierra Club and some others, need to help fill that void and support the needs. So, yeah, you're right. There's a public hearing, where people get a chance to express their concerns and hear and understand what's being proposed. But where the rubber meets the road is at Leg Hall. And so you're talking about lobbyists, and like I said, the Sierra Club doesn't have lobbyists. But the most significant thing that people can do is, number one, to stay plugged into some of these events, and some of these issues. And again, that's a role the Sierra Club can play to help communicate to folks, here's what's going on, and here's what you can do, right? And one of the greatest things that we can do is to show up at Leg Hall when things are being put on the table that are relevant to us. That's the time to step up and state your piece, hold your representative accountable. If even before you get to Leg Hall, call your representative, your senator and say, I need to talk to you about this issue. Okay. That's the point of contact that can make a difference. Like you said, at some of these public hearings, it's just a chance to blow off steam in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, again, I'll be blunt, the gig is already up. Okay. And so where we can have an impact from a community standpoint is to be at Leg Hall when these issues are put on the table. And even before that, contact your senator, your state senator, and your state representative to say, I need to talk to you about this. Here's my position on this, and here's what I need from you. And let's not forget, these representatives work for us, right? We don't work for them, so we need to keep that relationship right and ensure that they understand our needs and represent our needs accordingly. And, there's a chance to hold them accountable for that every time they're up for election. So we're in a more powerful position than we think we are in a lot of cases. We just need to direct that power to the right leverage point.
Yeah. I'm going to take a quick commercial break, but one of the things while you were talking, I was thinking about all this pollution that's going on. While I think sometimes the public meetings or public hearings are detrimental, a lot of times they are very much important because you get a chance to hear the propaganda that the people are trying to sell us stuff that we should not have. And that's how we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about all this cloud of smoke that we see, and they're telling us, oh, it's safe, it's safe.
It's all good.
We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. And we're back. What a great joy it has been, just having this conversation with Mr. Scott. And one of the things that I've been just trying to make sure I understood in this interview is the necessity, the need, the requirement to have regulations in so that we would be able to know what we're breathing, how much of it, because none of it we should be breathing at all. That is going to be detrimental to our health. And Trump administration or the administration that's current have come in and they've just got rid of everything. We didn't want to spend a lot of time focusing on what they're doing on the national. I was glad to hear that we're still making progress, step by step, on the local level, which is the state of Delaware. Being that Delaware is one of the states that have a high rate of cancer. Mr. Scott, I want to turn our attention a little bit to, I go to some of these hearings and I hear these people who bring these factories in, especially in the South Bridge section. And the question is always asked, all of this promotion, this stuff that's going to be in the air. And they're quick to say, "Oh, that's not
a problem.
Cancer. It's not a problem. Don't let it fool you. Don't let it be. It's not real." How true is that?
Sometimes true, sometimes not true.
Okay.
And so, we talked about the People's Anti-Pollution Bill. One of the core elements of that bill is to address, just those kind of issues. And so what it requires is that, if you're going to apply for a permit in what we call an overburdened community, a community that already has a high level of pollution, you have to do what's called an environmental justice impact analysis. And so what that analysis would provide is, okay, here's what you're going to emit, in terms of pollution. Here's the pollution that already exists in the area. Okay, so we're going to add those two together. And so when you add those two together, what does that imply in terms of health impact? And that assessment has to be done by a third party, not by the company.
Right.
A professional that's, certified to do that kind of work, to make a health impact analysis. And so now we're not taking the company's word for, what this stuff is going to do to you. We're, looking to an expert to say, yeah, when we take all these things into consideration, this is or is not a problem. Okay. The other thing that that Bill does is, these hearings that you go to today, in a lot of cases, things can be said there that aren't accurate. Okay, and there's no recourse. There's no accountability around that. And so one of the things we put in the bill is that, the information has to be accurate. If it's demonstrated to not be accurate, then it's tilt. Your permit application is thrown out, and you got to cycle back and come through again. So that hopefully we'll squelch some of that, to put some credibility around what's being said. Now the reality is that in some cases, what you see coming out of a stack may or may not necessarily be harmful. If it's steam, it's not a problem. It's just water vapor. But the guidance I typically give people is that if you can see it, it's probably something you need to be concerned about.
That's right.
And maybe it turns out to be just water vapor and steam, but it's probably something else as well. And so typically it's not a case where, nothing that comes out of a stack is harmful. That's typically not the case. And so, that's why, I think to your point, it's important that we get credible information around what are you emitting. And, there are things we can't see that are being emitted. There's residue that, a big industrial facility will have a parking lot, right, or a lot of paved area. And there's stuff that goes up in the air and comes down to the ground. There's stuff that comes out of the building, dust, and then lays on the ground. When it rains, where does all that stuff go? It goes into the sewer, and the sewer right out to the river. And so there are a lot of things that we don't think about, in terms of what emissions really mean, what pollution really means from an industrial standpoint that need to be considered, when we think about permitting these facilities going forward. The other thing that we looked at were things like distribution centers, which seems to be a new thing in Delaware, a new opportunity. And, the state's well situated for the location of distribution centers, and they do bring jobs. But today, DENREC doesn't really regulate distribution centers. They're pretty much regulated by the city or the municipality in terms of whether or not the zoning is proper. But when you think about all of the trucks that come in and out, each one of those trucks, goes through an inspection, just like you get your car inspected. But if you got 100 trucks, diesel trucks, rolling through a neighborhood, sitting at a distribution facility all day, then that becomes, more of an issue than just a single truck.
Yes.
It's now what I would consider to be a stationary source of pollution because, every day there's 100 trucks, at that distribution center. And even though they're moving in and out, the impact from an emission standpoint is about the same as it would be if there was a facility there with, smokestacks. So those kind of things, we really need to get tightened up. And to your point, we need to make sure that people get good information, and credible information around what's being proposed.
Yeah, and I know you guys over there, and I mean in a generic sense, are going to continue to keep your eyes open and keep your eyes watching and your voices heard to ensure that we keep or we make Delaware a more healthy place to breathe and drink water and things of that nature. And that's one of the reasons why I continue to invite you back, because this matters to us. We a lot of people have died of things and they don't even know to today what it was all about. But your eyes and you all being attentive to those things are very much important. How long do you think it's going to take to really recover from the damage that a national administration is doing to the EPA?
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's a great question. So we can expect further deterioration over the next,
Yeah.
how many number of days we got left, until the term's over, 3.5 years or more than 3.5 years. And then a lot of it's an interesting question because, you can restaff the EPA, you can put the regulations back in effect, but then you got to think about the damage that's been done
Yes.
during that 4-year interim.
It's the harder
And
question.
so if we're talking about water pollution, the pollution is in the water now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you got to figure out, how do you deal with that? If you're talking about air pollution, that's been admitted. Okay, and people have, people have had to breathe it, and so you don't really recover from that. That's in place now, and whatever impact that's had on people's health, is kind of static. It's there, and now it's how do you get healthy from that? So it's a layered question because there's the administrative and legislative side of it and regulatory side of it that, you could fix in, a year. If you had the right administration come in behind this current administration, put all those things back in place and reestablish those offices and put all the regulations back where they needed to be. So that could be done in a reasonably short period of time. The longer term issue, though, is the damage that's done in the interim. And some of that I don't think you can mitigate. You don't necessarily recover from it because it's happened. It's like a wreck.
Yeah.
The car is wrecked, and so you can't unwreck it. And I think that's what the real challenge is. So we just need to be conscious that, again, I think that's the rationale for why we really need to push as hard as we can at the state level to avoid having the wreck, right?
In our local municipalities.
Right, and local municipalities, right? So that's a great point because the Newcastle County Council, again, is a great opportunity for people to advocate and engage for what they think is necessary.
Right.
And so it's not just at the state level, but the county level, the city level, the city of Wilmington, and the same applies downstate. Being engaged at those local municipalities is just as important as it is to be at the state level.
Yeah. This has been a really good conversation. And I know there are many people who are watching us are saying, I didn't pay attention to a lot of the environmental things, but now I believe they're going to start looking at it in a different way and supporting when people are, especially when those of you who vote, you got to vote beyond just a person who look good on camera. You got to look at people's positions, and I've learned that as a person who had voted his whole life. My mother instilled in us, you got to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, well, if I'm a Democrat, I'm gonna vote Democrat. If I'm a Republican, I'm just gonna vote with the party. I've learned not to do that.
Yeah.
Because our interest is our life.
Yeah.
And if you're not taking care of the environment, we shouldn't be supporting you. I mean, because it's that serious.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I've kind of learned, okay, and I try to talk about sometimes is, we often look at a candidate and say, okay, what's he going to do for, she going to do for me, right? And I think we saw a lot of that in the last presidential election. This one didn't do anything for me, maybe the other one will do something for me. I think the other question you got to ask is, what could they do to me?
Oh, wow.
Okay,
Never
which
thought
is
of
a
that.
whole different thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's a double-edged sword here.
Yeah.
And
when you're weighing the two out, sometimes you'll go with the one who ain't did nothing because he ain't gonna do nothing to you, as opposed to the one who's gonna do stuff that's gonna destroy your life.
I'll take status quo versus murder any day.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
So that's I think a key lesson that hopefully we'll learn through these next 2 or 3 years is that there is a difference in candidates.
Yes.
And you may not see that difference as cleanly in terms of, well, this one said he's going to do this for me, and that one said he's going to do that for me, and, I like that one better. But you got to turn that thing over and say, okay,
what are they going to do to me?
What could they do to me?
And man, aren't we getting some stuff done to us at this point?
We're getting the second question answered.
Yeah. As we're closing out our time, what is Delaware's 2025 climate action plan for the Sierra Club?
Yeah, so we'll continue to. We've got 2 fundamental committees that work on, 3 actually, that work on environmental issues in the state. One is the Climate and Energy Committee. The other is the Conservation Committee, and then there's the EJ Committee. So the Climate and Energy Committee, they work primarily on climate action stuff.
Right.
Ranging from dealing with issues around sea level and water level rise to electrification and ensuring that, we get rid of fossil fuels as much as we can so that, we don't continue to pollute the atmosphere with greenhouse gases and cause all these adverse weather issues that, we see, and a bunch of other things. But that's fundamentally the role of that group. The Conservation Committee focuses on preserving natural lands, parklands, and, ensuring that people have an opportunity to experience nature. And then the Environmental Justice Committee focuses on a lot of what I just talked about, and that is how do we support our environmental justice communities in the state to improve the quality of life and protect, their health as best we possibly can, and to change and shift and try to mitigate some of the harms that have been done in the past. And so those are the three basic committees. If I'll speak to the Environmental Justice Committee, and they're going through the process now of trying to sort out their key focus areas for the coming year. And it looks like the focus is going to be on water quality this year. Now, there'll still be a lot of effort going on around air quality and, working on the People's Anti-Pollution Bill and that kind of thing. But there are issues with things like lead pipes, lead issues. We talked about some of the issues down south with, runoff from poultry, farms and how those, materials are used and the impact they have on water quality. We talked about PFOAs, that forever chemical that, we found in our water table. And so, recognizing that those are key issues across the state, not, there's some concentrated in southern Delaware, but we suffer from some of that in Newcastle as well. I think the focus for the EJ committee this year is going to be more on improving water quality. And we'll still work on air quality as well. There's probably a good opportunity for a plug if I can make one.
Sure, sure.
If anybody's interested in joining, then we'd love to have more people come and join those committees. You can, they're done on Zoom in a lot of cases. And we do have some in-person meetings. But just go to sierraclub.org and you can, find the local Delaware chapter on that website. And it'll show you, the activities that the club's engaged in. And it'll also show you how to participate. So we'd love to have more people come and participate in those committee meetings, because that's where the strategies are developed and some of the action plans are put in place to think about how we're going to address some of those issues. But the better representation we've got from the community of what's needed, then it gives us, a much better position to be in to figure out how to support, those issues.
Yeah, and again, for those of you who are watching, sierraclub.org, we're going to have it at the bottom of the screen. Mr. Scott really wants us to be a part of this. He can't, and his group, the Sierra Club, can't really handle this alone. It's refreshing to hear you share that it looks like we're moving in the right direction with our leadership. Our public servants, our politicians, our elected officials, they work at our pleasure. And a lot of times, and I love I'm coining your own phrase, a lot of times it's not about what a person has done for me. It's really about what a person can do to me.
Right.
I love that. And I'm going to use that because that has to become the new conversation. And if we don't get this conversation out there right, what's going to happen is we're going to keep electing people because they haven't done nothing. They haven't really, they've done this or they haven't done that. So this is a bit of eeny, meeny, miny, mo type situation. Right. But the damage that we are now experiencing with the current administration on the national level, it matters.
Exactly.
And we really got to pay attention to that. Mr. Scott, it has always been a joy having you with me, and I'm going to continue to invite you back, and I hope you'll continue to come back and keep the fight up. One more time, if you can just share in your camera with the people how they can get in touch with your group, the sierraclub.org situation, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, so sierraclub.org, or you can just Google Delaware Sierra Club, and it'll take you directly to our website.
Excellent.
And again, you'll see plenty of information there on how to get in touch with, the various committees that are there and how to be engaged. And to add on to your point, it not only is beneficial to have more people in the fight, but again, the role of the Sierra Club is to support communities, okay? And so, it's very easy to step up and for me or somebody else to step up and say, here's what you need, okay? But what we really want to know is, what do you feel you need? And then give us a chance to think about, okay, how can we help and how can we support that?
Excellent.
So that, at the end of the day, everybody's satisfied.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Scott, it has been a joy once again having you on the
Likewise.
show with me, and
Likewise.
I appreciate you so much. And I want you to keep the fight and you're still looking good and young. So you're not obviously breathing the same stuff that some other folks are breathing because you look good. So I thank you so very much for the
No
time you
problem.
share with us
No
today.
problem. Enjoy
We're
it.
gonna take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. We're back. Listen, it has been a joy sitting with Mr. Willie Scott from the Sierra Club. And honestly, we have to start paying attention to our health. Those of you who've been watching me see that I've lost weight. I've really been paying close attention. My daughter being born, and now that she's in her teenage years, I want to make sure she have a father who is functioning. What we breathe, what we eat, what we consume, whether it be the water, whether it be the food, whether it be the air, we have to start paying attention to it. And I think until we make it a priority, we're going to continue to die from things we just don't know. When you have people like Mr. Scott who comes in and he shares with you information, we should not take this as, oh, I didn't like this interview because it wasn't jumping around selling me something or providing me with something that really is just temporary. Your health is all you have while you're on this earth. You have to pay attention. And he said something that I'm going to throw in some of my sermons. We have been voting for people. We've been making people our friends for what they do for you or may have done for you. But the real deal is, what can they do to you? That's important. And after living through and in the midst of this Trump administration, it's going to be important that we pay attention to that part of the question. We got to flip it now. What can this person do to me? If a person is not helping your health, they're harming your health. If a person is not giving you an opportunity to live longer, understand what you're exposed to, they're harming you. If you take nothing away from this interview today, take away the fact it's time for us to take charge of our lives and our health. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I will be bringing back Mr. Scott as much as needed because I want to keep you consciously aware of what's happening with your health in the environment. And when you hear like it's a fluke, it's not real, don't pay attention to the environmental folks. It is real. And I'm glad he gave us the example of what happened even in California. We can now see that it's not always cloudy there because they took aggressive action towards making their quality of air, quality of water to heart. We must do the same thing in Delaware. Too many of our loved ones have gone on prematurely. We want to take care of our health. I thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And until the next time we get together, may the Lord God bless you real good.
Thank you for watching this episode of Coffee with Curry. Tune in next week, Sunday at 11 a.m.